Hi, I'm Donna Davis, along with Richard Cole, our resident experts on everything about wild birds. So thanks for being here today, Richard.
Oh, my pleasure. Absolutely.
So Richard is going to be here to talk about some of the things that we should know going into summer about birding. This is taped today. We both are going on some vacation, so it's taped,
Yes.
not live, but feel free to go ahead and ask your questions in the comments, and we will get back to you. So we're here every Wednesday, or not every Wednesday, every first Wednesday of the month at 3 o'clock to answer your birding questions. So we got a lot to talk about today.
Yes. Yes, we do.
We're going to talk about what to do about the baby birds. We're going to go over some of the native species and how that's non-native species and how that affects your feeder. And then we're just going to talk about bumblebees, which you need to know about that.
Yeah.
So let's get to it. Let's talk about the babies first.
Babies, this is the time of year to talk about them. The breeding season's well underway, has been for a month or two now, and all of a sudden there's a lot of babies out there. And we talked last time about if they're on the ground, leave them alone. If they're not in immediate danger, do not pick up baby birds. They're not abandoned unless you have knowledge that the parents have been killed, which is unlikely. Just if you have to, pick them up and put them over into some bushes close by. The parents will find them. I'll mention real quick something I just remembered. Talking about touching baby birds and moving them if they have to. There was a wren nest at a place I was at. And in fact, it was my daughter's place. And they had something over a tarp, and a wren had built a nest under this tarp, and they had to have it. So they had to take the tarp off, and there was the nest. What do you do? And what they did, was just simply take a milk jug, cut part of the front of it off, take it to a tree about 10 or 15 feet away, and picked up the nest, put it in that milk jug, put a little dark cloth over the milk jug, and like, oh my goodness, the parents got to be freaking out. Just stuffed the nest in there, and backed away. Birds went right to it.
Good.
They
That's
could hear
good
the
to
babies.
know.
They moved. So we picked up their entire
Right.
house, walked away with it, stuck it into a strange thing on the side of a tree.
Right.
Didn't matter. The birds went to it.
It happens. I heard on Facebook that somebody had birds nesting in the boat. And so they were like, well, we can't use the boat. And they're kind of like, the thought is either you just throw it out, which would be horrible, or you don't use it. So they didn't use it. So that's good to know that you can
Yes.
move a nest. So let's talk about what we need to have out for our feeders to help the whole family and the babies.
Well, like I said, there's a lot of babies out there now, so the population is probably going to be triple at least for a while. So they need a lot more food. And the babies are not ready to go out there and crack seeds at this point. It'd be pretty quick, but then there's a lot of non-shell cracking type birds who need food. So I like to put out sunflower meats, or sunflower hearts as some people call them. It's probably a universal food for most birds, even non-seed eating birds, because there's no shell on it. It's very nutritious. They can almost feed this directly to the babies. The sun meats are very much like a piece of an insect. It's soft, it's moist, and it has a lot of protein, and that's good for all the baby birds. Of course, you have things like suet, and we're used to seeing it in a big square cake, about that thick. You put it in a suet basket. That's a good way to put it out. Also, Coles has come up with suet kibbles. It's just little pellets of suet. They're soft. They've got color. One of them has insects in it. One of them doesn't. And you put those in a bowl. You can put them out on a railing, and the birds will spot them, especially if it's close to a feeder. So this is a very good food. It's small. It's pelletized. It dissolves easy. It's good for baby birds. And then there's mealworms, dried mealworms. We have packages of those. They're very nutritious because they're protein. The birds will take to them, and I generally put those in a little bowl that's hanging, and we see bluebirds at that all the time. I see wrens at it all the time. Several of the warblers, who generally were never considered to be seed eaters or birds that would even come to feeders, but once you get to the sunflower meats and things like mealworms and suet, you'll have birds like that also warblers coming to your feeder. And those three things are very good to feed to the baby birds.
Yeah, good. And while we're talking about food and what to feed to the baby birds, we did get a question from one of our viewers, and they were asking about whether or not you can feed bread to birds. And I always wonder myself, like, we'll have a little leftover toast or whatever. Do you put it out there for the birds? Is it good for them?
This is something when I was young, that was last century or so. You would hear
Everyone
that
fed bread to birds.
Yes, it was like, oh, you put out extra bread or the
Yeah.
stale bread, the old bread, you
Right.
throw it out for the birds.
Right.
And now it's coming to the question, well, is that good for them? It's not bad for them. I would not throw out moldy bread. If you're going to throw it out, throw it out. Don't throw it out to the birds. If it's
Yeah.
a little stale, that's okay. The birds aren't that picky. If it's a little dry, that's fine. They don't mind. And I wouldn't feed them just bread, but yeah, that's not going to bother them one bit. It's
Yeah.
not a bad thing to feed them. And that brings up another question. For summertime, it's wedding time.
Yes.
Weddings are breaking out everywhere. And another thing I started hearing so many years ago, you can't put out rice at weddings. Don't throw the
Exactly.
rice
Everybody
at weddings.
changed, yeah.
Why? Well, the birds are going to pick up the rice.
Right.
They're going to swallow it. And the rice is going to swell up. The birds are going to explode.
Right.
Whatever. It's going to kill them. And exploding birds, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? That's not true. But people get these things going, and it's, like urban
Well,
legends.
people literally stopped throwing rice at weddings over it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And a lot of people start throwing millet, which
Yeah.
is a nice ground food. There's nothing wrong with that. But the rice isn't going to hurt anything. If you think about it logically, take some rice and put it on the table. It's not going to do anything. Take the hard rice and swallow it. Why is it going to? It's not going to do anything. But why? You have to boil it.
Yeah.
You can put rice in water. It's just not going to do a whole lot.
Yeah.
Unless it's boiling, and it's not boiling inside of a bird.
I never thought about it that way.
So
Right.
it's not going to do anything. I don't think you'll have too many birds eating it
Yeah.
because they just don't.
Right.
It's a hard little thing, but some birds would eat it. But if you throw it out, it's fine. It won't hurt
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah, that's
And,
amazing how that myth just got so propagated. And I get the one about the baby birds, like if you touch a baby bird,
Yeah.
it'll kill it. Everybody's mother probably said that because they didn't want you to mess with them.
Yeah.
But that's another myth. But definitely the birds, the rice, you just wonder where that came from.
Yeah, that's actually a couple of good ones right there in touching the baby birds, and then you realize that the birds have virtually no sense of smell.
Yeah.
So even if they didn't like you, they wouldn't be able to smell you on their little ones. So it's
Probably
not gonna
best,
have
though, for kids to leave them alone.
Absolutely.
At least maybe there was method to that madness. Now let's talk about the bumblebees that are out. I mean, it's not only
Yeah.
baby birds, it's baby bumblebees, too.
There's a lot of bumblebees out there. Now, there's two types of these bees around, carpenter bees and bumblebees. The carpenter bees are the ones you see drilling into the wood around your house to make little holes, and when you see the sawdust falling, they're
Right.
drilling a nesting ground. Bumblebees don't do that. Bumblebees nest in grasses and leaf litter in a area like under some leaves or in a place that's somewhat sheltered in straw. Very much like little bird nests.
Yeah.
There's the problem. We take and put these boxes up, or in my case, a nesting platform, which I'll mention in just a minute. But the birds come along, bluebirds and all, chickadees, and put this nice nesting material in there. And a bumblebee comes along, looks in there, says, fantastic, ready-made home. They go in there, get under it, start creating a nest under the nest of the birds, and everything's fine until they start raising, then they'll run the bird out. As soon as you touch that box, if you go to check on your bluebirds, and you start to move something, you hear zzz, zzz,
Yeah.
you've got a bumblebee inside that box, and you won't have birds. They will have gone. They will have abandoned nest. So you want another reason to monitor nest boxes, especially if you hear that, you're probably not going to see the birds in there. Just go ahead and take that nest out, shake the bumblebees out, let them start over, because that nest is not going to be successful.
Right, and you did this, and your wrens were
I did.
run out.
I have a bag, a canvas bag on my back porch, sheltered, that wrens have nested in for a while. I got real clever and said, well, I've got a post on my front porch. The top of it's kind of open and flat. So I put a piece of plywood up there, put some little posts around it so it'd have a little nesting platform under the covered part of the porch. And the wrens took to it immediately. As soon as the breeding season came this year, they were up there. I saw straw up there. Oh, great. And they built a nice nest. A few weeks later, I'm not seeing any activity. It's like, that's unusual. I should see these birds coming and going by now. And I went up there, I got a little step stool and got up there. And as soon as I touched that nest to look in, I heard a zzz, zzz, uh-oh. And it was bumblebees in there. The wrens had bailed out they actually ended up going back to the back porch to their old nest and built a nest back there because they had to start over. So bumblebees are a problem. They're really easy to tell when you hear that noise.
Yeah.
I wouldn't pick up the nest and shake it with the bumblebees in it, but you can wait. You can, at that point, you can put a little 7 in there. You can blast it with a hose or whatever because the birds aren't there. And then when you get throw it out, clean it off, and let the birds come back to it if they're ready to. Then you'll save the nesting site for somebody else. But be aware that can happen. That's another good reason to monitor your nest boxes, especially because if you hear that, just go ahead and get rid of the nest. Don't feel bad about the nest. Get rid of it, and then get the bees out. Give it a few days, and let them see if they'll come back and take it again. But you'll salvage maybe the rest of the season, especially for the bluebirds who nest several times.
Yeah, it's so much fun to see but right now, this time of year, it is so much fun to see all the feeding going on, the learning to fly, and the babies getting fed at the seed feeders. This is just something you don't want to miss out on. So let's talk about the invaders at our feeders now.
Yeah. Well, we're getting through the breeding season now. The bird population is swelling, and things are going to start changing. If we get down to August and September, most of the breeding's over with, except for the late breeders like the goldfinches. So the babies have got a nest, and the birds don't have to stay in one place anymore. They can now move around. They had to spread out, build their nest, raise their young, then they come back. Some of the birds, blackbirds especially, tend to flock, and they'll start joining back up with groups as we get further into the year. And those groups can be very large, and they can really raid your feeders a lot too. I saw my first grackle the other day that actually came to the feeders and seems like it was hanging out. It won't be long, and I'll see 20 or 30, and there'll be starlings everywhere out there. And it's just going to be a passing thing, especially here in the southeast. They'll start grouping up into large flocks. Then they'll move out, hopefully out of my area into somebody else's area, and that's okay.
Right.
As long as they're not in my backyard.
And let's talk about the kind of seed that you can get that maybe they won't eat, or at least they won't eat as much of it.
Yeah, that's. I'll mention briefly, like people say all the time, well, how do I stop the grackles? How do I stop the starlings? It's very difficult. You can go to much smaller feeders with short perches. That slows them down a lot. But there's not a lot you can do except for giving a food that they don't like. And just so happens
that you have some.
Kohl's packages some. I call this the forgotten seed, and it's all white. Actually, if you look at it very closely, the little kernels look a lot like white corn, just a little bit smaller. It's shaped kind of like little white corn kernels.
It's very hard.
It's very hard, and it's safflower. You'll recognize when you go to the grocery store, you see safflower oil. That's what they make it from, safflower. In this stage, it's very bitter. Not terribly bitter, but you bite it, it's like, nah, it's not pleasant.
But the cardinals love it.
It was touted many years ago as a cardinal food.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's all I was going to eat, the cardinals, but they love this stuff. The good part about it is when I first started experimenting with this down here in the South, put that down, that's 5 pounds. I noticed something curious. The cardinals did like it. And of course, chickadees and titmice would come and get some of it. Not real fast, but they would get it. But the blackbirds, the starlings, and the grackles pretty much left it alone.
Yeah.
Don't know why, don't care why. That kind of works. So when I was getting these herds of blackbirds and starling coming in, I couldn't keep them off a feeder I had on a post that was open like a gazebo feeder. Nothing I could do. The answer was safflower seed. Once I noticed I wouldn't eat it, I just started putting, when they start showing up this time of year, August, September, I would just put all safflower in some of these feeders. They'd come in for the first maybe week, there's some problem. They'd throw a lot of it out looking for something to eat, and I'd scoop up a lot and put it back in there.
Yeah.
And after a while, they just gave up. They just didn't like it. In the meantime, I don't have the blackbirds, but I've got the cardinals and some of the other birds coming to it, loving it.
Yes, we have different Coles feed, like the special feed or the blue ribbon blend. We'll always have those, and then a little sunflower meats just in a small feeder so that just the little birds can get to that, because I'm not feeding that to the huge birds. But always safflower, because safflower is just a great backup to have out there. It tends to go a little bit slower, and the cardinals love it, and we don't see a lot of blackbirds and that kind of thing after it.
Yeah, one of the things we've done in our blends, if you go and change what a bird is eating, if it looks different, all of a sudden, that's not what they want. They don't know, they don't like change as much as we don't like change. So they come up, they're used to seeing special feeder or one of the darker blends with sunflower in there, and they come up to this, it looks different, and they'll just look at it and fly away. It takes them a little time, and they're not used to this seed. We have included this seed, a little bit of it, in our special feeder. And so they're used to seeing the little white things, they're used to eating it. When I do my changeover, it's fine with them. Most of the birds keep coming, like I said, the blackbirds pretty much leave it alone.
Yeah. So one of the things I have to tell you, I wish I had gotten video of this, but where is your phone when you need it? The other day, this is the most fun part of summer to me. I'm standing in my kitchen window. We have a feeder right outside there, and little, I guess it was house finch, was doing this little dance like for trying to attract the female. Female was like, I really don't care, I'm not looking, but it was so adorable. And I guess you see that sort of thing all the time.
I do. I think the first time I really noticed it, I was somewhere in another state on a training session for a job I used to have, and we were going out for lunch, and we stopped at a light, and I was on the passenger side, and I looked on the corner, and it was house finches, house sparrows, and another bird we'll talk about, but they were doing that courtship dance. There were 3 or 4 of them. It's like they were watching. It had drawn a little crowd, and they were posturing and doing the wing wag and holding the tail up and dancing around each other. It's like I had to go because the light turned green, but it's
So
like I wanted to go back and see
that.
that.
Yeah.
It was very interesting, and I've seen it a couple of times since. It's just fun to watch. It's interesting to see these guys going through courtship.
Yeah, I know. We talked a lot about, before we got started, about the house sparrows and how many are in the United States now.
Oh, boy.
Boy, we've been invaded.
Yeah. There's you hear the term non-native species or invasive species. We see that a lot with plants like kudzu. Well, birds are the same way. We have brought in birds from mainly Europe because it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. House sparrow is one of them, and it's really a finch from Europe. And somebody decided it would be a good idea to bring him into New York because New York at the time, and this is like late 1800s, early 1900s, they were having a problem in New York with a moth larvae eating their trees, the leaves off their trees.
That's why.
So it's like, somebody had the idea, let's bring in these guys, the house sparrows, because they will eat the larvae, and they'll solve our problem here in New York City. I don't know how many larvae they ate. I don't know if it helped, but gee, as I say, the rest is history. They brought in 60 birds one year.
Really?
It may have been like 1910, or in the next year, 1911, or in that period. They brought in 40 more. Not a lot of birds, just 100 birds. And they turned them loose in New York City. Now there's 600 million of them is the estimate in this country.
Wow.
And they do tend to displace native species. Most or a lot of introduced species of any kind, plants or animals, tend to have an advantage because they're out of their native area where they're held in check by parasites, diseases, predators, and they come to a new place. Those don't affect them here as much. So they can breed and spread rapidly. The house sparrow did the same thing. Now they're all over. I always call them burger birds because I don't think you could go to a drive-in hamburger place in the entire country without seeing these little brown birds hopping all over the place.
Right, they're everywhere.
And they have caused some problems with our native birds. They're all still alive, and of course the house sparrows are too. So it's never a good idea to bring in non-native species. Another good example of somebody trying to do the right thing was the starling. Well, they weren't trying to do the right thing. They were just trying to do a fun thing, an interesting thing. Here again, early 1900s, someone decided that the starling was a very pretty bird. They are. I mean, the starlings are nice-looking birds. We don't think of it because they're bad old blackbirds. But somebody decided it'd be a good idea to bring in all the birds to this country mentioned in Shakespeare's plays.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
What a nice thing to do, of course. Well, as I say, the rest is history on that one also. They brought in some, and the population of those just exploded. So now we have European starlings, the proper name for them, all over the country. Right. And they are a nuisance, and especially when they start coming and raiding your feeders. So two things that try to fix something or enjoy something, you can't do that, or you shouldn't do that. It always causes a problem. There was a third one, I can mention probably 20 other introduced species. I don't think any of them have had the impact that those two have. But the house finch, which a lot of people, especially in the East, confuse with purple finches.
Right.
But they're a little different. The house finch was, or is, a native of Southwest U.S. and northern Mexico. And why does New York attract all these things? Someone decided that it'd be great to grab a few of them, take them to New York City and sell them as Hollywood finches, because there's some of them there. And they did. It was highly illegal at the time, still is. So when word got around that they were selling Hollywood finches, and they just turned them loose.
Yeah.
And it was just, I think, 150 of them or something, that's all. But then 5 to 8 years later, they're starting to see more of them around New York, and then it spread, and it's New Jersey, I think most of them got released in. Now they're all over the East. So we have a previously native to the Southwest U.S. bird, now almost entirely across the country because of that release. Good or bad, but at least it's a native species, but it's in the wrong place now.
Was it the house finch that you told me that when their numbers are big or when they migrate to the Southeast, you actually see an uptick in sales with birdseed? Is it the house finch? It might have been another bird that comes in every once in a while.
There's a couple of them, and the house finch doesn't do a lot of migrating, and they tend to just hang around, which was good for birdseed sales, because as that population exploded because of what I mentioned earlier, not many diseases or pests they just took off. And that was probably our most numerous bird back in the 80s. And they would just come to the feeders and just sit and eat and eat. Of course, they're rotating out because there's so many of them. Then, of course, some diseases started taking effect because the population was over here now. And we saw a drastic decline in those birds in the 80s. They had an eye disease, and it would end up killing them. And that went on for 10 to 12 years or more. We still see a little bit of it, conjunctivitis.
Yeah.
Don't see it near as much. Most of the birds that survived, or generations of birds that survived, are probably somewhat immune to it now. So that population is coming back a little bit.
Yeah.
But there's several birds, if you're in different parts of the country, birds that won't be in your part of the country except for a certain season or passing through on a migration to South America, or some of them, like the goldfinch, seems to be partially migrant. Some of them move very far north for the breeding season, come back. Some of them just seem like they just move around a little bit. And so you might see them one year, not the next year. Pine siskins in the southeast.
Pine siskins.
It's a little small brownish bird, and slim with a little orangey stripe on the side down by the tail. They come in, there seem to be a lot of them. You might not see them for a couple of years. Then all of a sudden, you see them. This last year...
They are a big fan of Coles.
They are a big fan of Coles. Thank goodness. I love those birds. I wish they would go everywhere. But they come in like that, and it's like, oh, it's neat. You see a thing, but there's a lot of them, and they eat a lot of seed. You might not see them the next year. Or you may. We've seen them for 2 years, 3 years now. 1 year, there was a lot of them. This year, there hasn't been so many, but there's still a few here. That may taper off. I might not see any for 3 or 4 years.
So that should be your favorite bird.
It's one of my favorite birds. It sure is. It sure is.
Anything else you want to talk about today?
Oh, my goodness. There's so much to talk about.
I know. This is a fun time in birding. It really, I love this season. Love to see them.
Yeah. This time of year, like I said, with all the babies out, and put out some special food for these guys. There's a lot of birds out there, and you'll see a lot of different ones. Start paying attention to what birds are coming to your feeder. Start looking at the differences, because in wild birds, of course, you're familiar with a lot of birds, or the male and female look totally different, like the bright yellow goldfinch as opposed to the more toned down female. Cardinals, gee, they look kind of the same. One of them's lighter than the other, but not drastically. But then you look at, what does a baby cardinal look like? Well, it looks kind of like the adult female, toned down version of the male, but the bill will be dark color.
Oh,
It will not have turned yellow until after this season into next spring. Then they'll be fully turned to male colors or female colors, but they'll have the more yellow cream colored beak. So you'll see some subtle differences. A good field guide will help you see the differences in the males, females, and the juveniles this time of year.
Yeah. So that does remind me. So it's summer, and we want to hear a little bit about hummers. Because you got to take care of the hummers. We're seeing them.
Yeah. It's time now for me to hear a lot of people say, well, I had hummers last year. I don't have any this year. What happened? Nothing. Now, we're in the southeast, and this plays out pretty much everywhere, more so in the south, and here's why. We have hummers come in starting in March, or a little April, come in, but they're moving through the south to go to the north or the south to set up their territory and breed. And while they're on the nest, like the starlings, they're all spread out. And then the breeding season's over. Not only are those two birds about to move south, but all their babies from one or two broods they've had. So you've had another 3 or 4 or 5 birds. Now there's a lot more birds, 3 times the population. Now they start moving south, and then you start seeing them. When they come in the spring, headed north, they seem like they go faster. Now, this is not super scientific, but they're on a mission to get to the breeding grounds.
Yeah.
There's no reason to slow down. Coming back, there's a good reason to slow down, because they've got a long, long flight ahead of them. The birds in the east, a lot of these birds have to cross the Gulf of Mexico to get down to Central America. The birds in the west still have a long flight, sometimes from up in Alaska all the way down into Central America. So they want to fatten up. It's time for them to move slowly, more slowly, and fatten up. I think I've mentioned before, a hummingbird, say a ruby throat here in the southeast, this time of year may weigh 2.5 grams, maybe 3 grams. Then what's going to happen is they need to get up to about 4 grams or so for these long flights. So they'll just hang out and pig out. So if you have feeders, you're going to see them. Everybody says, where's my hummingbirds? Well, they're coming. It's summertime, yes, but you're not going to see the hordes of hummingbirds until down in late July through the month of August and early September, when they're all getting out of here to go to Central America and hanging out at feeders. Then you'll see a large population at your feeders. They're coming. Be patient.
Yeah. All right, well, that's all the time we have today. Don't forget, you can put your comments just in the comment section. Why is that so difficult? So you can put your comments there, and Richard or someone from Coles will get back and answer your birding questions. And Richard is here every first Wednesday of the month at 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time to answer your questions. We'll see you next time.